today. Very excited to have you. We have 42 people in the room, which is a great turnout for our very first community roundtable. Just a very, very brief background on Braintrust. We are a new freelancing platform that just came out of stealth last month. As you might have seen, the New York Times, Fortune, CoinDesk, and a few other major publishers has wrote our story because of our really unique model built on blockchain. It's a freelance platform where we want talents to keep 100% of your bill rates, and we only take 10% flat fee on the client side. Now, I don't personally have seen anything like this, and we're able to do it because of our token. And if you're interested about how our token works, I'm happy to share with you our token guide, and there's a lot of materials in your talent dashboard. Adam goes into a lot of details about it, but essentially it represents control of the platform. If you are a Braintrust talent, you are an owner of the talent, and that's why a lot of you, we encourage you to put founding member on your LinkedIn, on your social profiles, because you own a part of Braintrust if you earn Btrust. And so that's just something that's really different for me. I've never seen, and I joined the company earlier this year with my company Muses. When I was choosing for a new home for my company, I realized that Braintrust is something that's really different, and that's why I made the decision. So very excited to be here. I am Shirley Yang. I am the head of community for Braintrust. The goal of community is to connect all of you in the room and to provide resources, learnings, opportunities to help further your career, whether that's going from part-time to full-time freelancing or expanding your existing business. So part of that is my job to understand who you are and what are your needs. You can reach out to me anytime you'd like, shirley@usebraintrust.com. And without further ado, today we're here to talk about pipeline. It's called a community roundtable. This is the first of many that I'd like to host going forward. If it's successful and you like it, I'm gonna get your feedback. But essentially, Chris here is a very experienced freelancer, entrepreneur. He's been freelancing for 6 years. He's a product manager who's managed over 100 projects and several IoT large scale projects. I'll let Chris do a brief intro of who he is, but today he's going to talk about building a steady pipeline and his methods. After that, we get to do Q&A. So while Chris is presenting, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box. I will go back and moderate and ask questions. And then after the Q&A with Chris, we'll open up to community discussions. I have some questions to lead the conversation, but that's when everyone can discuss as a group. Sounds good? All right. Chris, I'm going to make you the host so that you can present your slides.
Yep, that sounds good. Let me see. Okay. Here we go. So excited to be talking to you all today. I didn't include an intro slide, but yeah, I've been a freelancer for about 6 years. I've been part of Braintrust as well as a variety of other platforms. I would say I also have my own agency for about 2 years, which we grew to at its peak 25 consultants. Building in our own agency only software. The IoT projects, they were predominantly for other agencies. So I was in the founding team of what is now also closed, but Udacity Blitz, which was an agency on top of the Udacity education model. And I was at Gigster when they were still in Y Combinator. So worked on some IoT projects there early on also. The presentation today is mostly relevant, I would say, for mostly tailored towards and therefore also relevant for project and product management, engineering and design freelancers. I'll point out a few things for finance and marketing freelancers as well. But for example, what I mentioned, what I saw someone was another virtual assistant, that is just an entirely different market that I would say some of these platforms will not be relevant for. Some of the principles might still apply, however. So I personally, these days, mostly work via agencies, but also sometimes directly with clients. I'll go into that in a little bit. Yeah, let's begin. So The first slide here, I put here because when you're looking for a steady pipeline, it is important that you know what your preferences are, right? So some people here are part-time freelancers. Some people care more about being busy, so they would care more about volume, even if the rate per hour is slightly lower. Other people would actually prefer to work less and have a higher rate. That is always a trade-off that you have to make, right? It might be easier if your regular rate is 100 to find a lot of work at 75 an hour, whereas at 100 you might have difficulty finding clients that are willing to pay that, as an example. I personally, I have to say, I'm rather in the category that I'd rather reduce my rate slightly to be more on the busy side, where I'm at least full-time engaged, because I personally know that I thrive being just busy. With more projects, under more pressure. I really enjoy doing more, shipping more work. When they always say work smarter or work harder, I like to do both. I like to work really hard and really smart at the same time. But that's of course a personal preference. So again here, cash and time. Would you rather freelance to sustain your lifestyle, or would you rather work as much as you can in order to build up more cash so that you can have more time later in your life, right? I presume that a lot of you don't believe in the traditional system of working 40 hours a week for at least 40 years of your life to then get some miracle pension from the state. Especially if you're in your younger years, you're probably never ever going to see a pension that is centralized, so you're in your control of your own destiny. I personally believe in an altered version of the FIRE movement, you might say, the Financial Independence Retire Early movement. In a similar way as I believe in working agile, not necessarily formally Scrum. I would say I believe in FIRE, but not necessarily the formal principles, right? Again, indirect or direct impact. So you might want to work for a social enterprise because you have a direct impact. I personally have done a lot of social enterprise. I also would have to say that my social enterprise work has only cost me money. And so some people might prefer to do indirect impact work, right? They prefer to earn a lot of money and then via donations, for example, make an impact in the world. I hope a lot of you do care about impact. We would match interest in that case. And again, short and long-term gains. So this is an important one as well. You might be able to get a lot of projects that get you good cash, but you might not be building a career. Work does not necessarily equate career. And this is actually something I have personally been struggling with at times. Being a freelancer for 6 years, I have largely stayed within the same level of responsibility. So it's quite hard as a freelancer when you're always doing what I would call, as a product manager, for example, individual contributor work, right? Where I'm individually responsible for the shipping of a product for a client. It can be quite hard to then graduate, so to speak, to being a product leader where I manage product managers. Because the question you're being asked is, when have you managed a team of product managers? And I'm like, well, I haven't, but I've managed a lot of products over the last 5 years. So I've, in the short term, gained a lot of cash potentially. But in the long term, I might have also damaged my career by doing so. Now, I think you're not stuck, right? It's not something you can't get out of, but it is something to consider. So sometimes you might want to take a job because it furthers your career, and sometimes it gets you cash. Let's move forward. And if I'm going too fast, let me know. There's just a lot of stuff to talk about. So this is one that I find really important. It's the 80-20 rule of impact. So what I would expect, and this is my personal experience, but also for the majority of you, you will get 80% of the returns from 20% of your clients, but similarly 80% of your work via 20% of your platforms. And sometimes it's not even 80-20, it could be 90-10. So as I mentioned here, it counts for jobs, it counts for platforms, and it counts for other things in life also. So you do have to diversify. It's good to be on a lot of platforms, because which platform you get your work from can shift at given points in time because of supply and demand on those marketplaces, because of potentially downwards pressure on rates, or a platform that shifts its policies to be more open, so it gets more people on, so there's a lot more supply on it versus demand. There are various things that can happen that'll shift that for you. And so over the years, that 80-20 rule for me has applied across 4 different platforms. Yeah, and this is only 6 years, right? So it shifts relatively frequently. So it's good to stay nimble and to diversify so that you can shift your attention when needed. Again, avoid commodity platforms. And this is where I mentioned that in the other segments, some industries don't apply. This is a slightly outdated graph, but there are a lot of platforms out there, right? And I put Braintrust in here because it wasn't in the original graph, but there was a little bit of empty space. Braintrust, I think, fits into category specific and curated. generally you want to be in the curated side of the marketplace, because curated means you can command a higher rate and there's going to be less supply vying for the same jobs, right? You don't want to be bidding against 100 people. Ideally, you don't bid against more than a handful of people, so that there's less of a chance that you waste your time. Because ultimately it's a numbers game, and it's better to have the odds be in favor of you. Some of these platforms, they actually assign you work, so you never have to bid. That can be good, but the interesting thing there to note, and one platform there, for example, is Gigster. You will never actually bid a project on Gigster. But platforms like that, when they assign you work, you also have to deal with humans, right? The people assigning are humans that you can be in their in-group or their out-group. And so playing human psychology is really important. That goes into my next slide. Be early, hungry, and bold. So being early is actually very important. And now you're early in Braintrust, which is great. But the earlier you are in a platform, the more of a leg up you have to build trust with the key stakeholders and gatekeepers of that platform. So you can get some of the early jobs on the platform, you do well. And then when that platform gets a higher priority job, right, a higher profile job from an enterprise client that they have to ship well, if it goes wrong, they lose a lot of future revenue. Who do they go to? Not a new person, they go to the person they already trust. So if you can be that person they already trust, you will get work, and it's a snowball. That platform will transform into your 80-20 sort of cash cow, right? For the foreseeable future, at least, until the market dynamics in that platform change. Being early is probably one of the most important reasons why I've been so successful as a freelancer over the last 5-6 years. I was early at Gigster, I was early at Blitz. Well, I was in the team of Blitz, but I with my own agency was early on some other platforms and in some other groups where I found projects as an agency. At one point with my agency, I got a lot of work via a Facebook group, which you know, after about 6 months of being in that Facebook group, other people started to learn about it, and it became a flooded marketplace. We didn't get any more work via it, but for those 6 months, it was a great place to find work because people would post looking for great developers, great agencies. And we would be one of the few professionals there. It was like a group for student developers. And we were professionals who had recently graduated, some of us. So it was close enough to not be sort of the old guys in the group, but more professional than the rest of them. But anyways, like that it very often happens that unless you're early, you're fighting this uphill battle against people that already are in the in circle. And some of the open marketplaces, if we go back here, Upwork, for example, is a place that really struggles with that, right? There are people with 8 years of history, with 5,000 reviews, that will always be more trusted than you without any reviews or with a couple of reviews. The more open you are, the more of a problem that is, where not being early will hurt your chance of getting work. But even in the curated marketplaces, that can be a problem. So one example, for example, TopTile, 2 years ago, they launched a product vertical. I was there at the beginning. Well, close to the beginning, so to speak. And over the years, I've built up enough trust so that if there's a high profile project, like I mentioned, enterprise project where they need someone they can trust, they don't want someone new necessarily, they would tap me on the shoulder because they know me, right? I have shipped good work for them. So at times, it's easier for me to get through that matcher to be presented to the client than it would be for someone without a reputation. Not saying that that's always the case. Of course, I still have to meet all the qualifications, but it just gives you a leg up. So definitely being early in Braintrust right now, it could pay to invest more in Braintrust so that when it grows, you grow with it and you have a leg up over people that join at a later point in time. Although the official platform might not want to say that because then later in time, people think that is the case. Read between the lines. And deliver quality is always the key. So another thing here, discounts don't win, right? It's very tempting now with COVID, there's rate pressure to say, oh, let me just cut my rate because I can live with less money, right? It's a lose-lose situation. I can live with $1,500 a month, right? I'm not gonna die with $1,500 a month. That doesn't mean that I wanna work for $1,500 a month. If I do that, I am basically destroying my own market. And this is a market where, you know, you don't want to be a cartel at the same time, but you have to know what the market rate is for the value you deliver. And it's better to actually implement value pricing than to do sort of sustenance pricing in this sense. If you're really, really desperate for work, okay, maybe you want to cut your price and just get that work for a short period of time. it's best to, but you're destroying the market. And it's really important to know that. It's also something I always advocate within platforms, that it shouldn't really be tolerated, because it's just bad for everyone involved. You're also, when you discount, not seen as a luxury product. And this is actually why it's a lose-lose, because even though you get the job, what you lose is often the respect of your client. Like if you're charging $20 an hour to your client, the client sees you as a $20 an hour freelancer. If you're charging $100 an hour to your client sees you as $100 an hour of value, right? They will respect your recommendations as coming from someone that costs $100 an hour. Whereas if you're $20 an hour, you will forever be in that frame for that client. Like, you are not a valuable resource. You are expendable, commoditized, and it's really important that you know that of yourself. Like, you may sometimes want to place yourself in that position, but be very careful with it. Referrals, they were mentioned in the brief as well. I sometimes get work from referrals. When I do, it mostly is from friends, clients, and colleagues that I have worked with. So a client that I've shipped some good work for will sometimes in their circles tell other people, and then naturally sometimes it just happens. I get someone approaching me saying, hey, this person told me about you and said you were a good person to work with. You can't count on it. What you can do, if you have a lot of bandwidth, you can let your network know that, including past clients, that you are open for work in case they know if they need work, or they know people that need work. What you can also do, and this is not always very popular, some people like it more than others. I personally have no issues with it. You can let it know that let it be known to people that you're happy to pay them a kickback, like, for example, 10% in the first 1 or 2 months of billing, so that people have an incentive to refer you to jobs. Now, the tricky thing there is that sometimes when they're hired on that job, they would kind of be breaching their responsibility by, for example, if I'm a product manager on a job and you're a developer, I can't introduce you to the client knowing I'm going to get a kickback, because it's a conflict of interest, right? I should be choosing the best developer for the client, not the one that gives me money. But as long as they are neutral parties, like I've had, for example, a referral once from a freelance professional who had overflow work, and he sent me his overflow client, and I gave him a 10% cut on the first 2 months of billing. It was a very, I think, worthwhile type of relationship to have. So if you can build that network, that can help. But again, I would not count on referrals personally. I would just not count on them, because you're not really in control of that pipeline. So yeah, that's it. I'm open to any questions right now. You can find me at Pruijsen or with my name pretty much anywhere. And just one last thing, because I know there are quite a lot of people here. So I saw there's someone from a finance background, for example, and finance is one of those areas where it's quite hard to find work on a lot of platforms like that are catering more to the tech market. So Catalan is one where you could probably find finance work, and TopTal also has a finance vertical. So for finance, I would look there. Some of these other names, they're probably quite well known to you. The one thing about Fiverr Pro I want to mention there is that it's similar to Fiverr, but it's a bit more curated, so more premium. I was actually in the process of crossing it out, but then I had a look, and a marketer friend of mine who used to work for YouTube is raking in quite a lot of money there. But you have to sell these fixed price packages. So again, fixed price packages are very different from what you would do on, say, a Braintrust or a TopTal or a Gigster, where you build you do work based on a client brief. So instead of basically getting a brief in and saying, this is my competency, I can do whatever you need me to do, on a Fiverr, for example, you would create a product. Like that is, for example, I will design a logo. I will create a press release, right? And that has a fixed price. Now, that is not for everyone. So decide for yourself if you have sort of packaged products that you could sell. If that is the case, I personally am starting to get into that a little bit with analytics instrumentation. Like, for example, I can, for your product, do an amplitude instrumentation where I figure out your data taxonomy, what you should track, why you should track it. And I set up some dashboards for you in Amplitude, and I can have a fixed price for that. That is most of the time reasonable. But for a lot of the professionals here, like if you, for example, have an app design, or you have a development project, there are way too many variables to be able to package that into a fixed price and do quality work. So yeah, that's just something to consider. That's it.
Chris, would you say, just in terms of curated marketplaces and commodity marketplaces, I mean, there's something to do with also the project size, right? So how much time do you spend to land a project, and whether or not that ROI is worth it, right? So something like an Upwork, their average project is, I don't know, $500. On Braintrust, the average project is $50,000. Granted, yes, we are still ramping up on the demand side, but it's, you know, once you land that project, it's typically a full-time and ongoing project. So how would you advise, if, let's say, to do, what's the optimal way to look at a breakdown, if there even is one, to source these projects on the platforms based on the return you can get and the time spent?
Yeah, so I don't like to think about the top line only. I'd rather look at the hourly rate plus the top line, right? So if it's a $50,000 project, but I'm getting $50 an hour, my margin, so to speak, is actually very low, right? I'm hurting every hour, so to speak, to work on that project. So I wouldn't want to spend much time doing it. If my hourly would be $150 and it's $50,000, I wouldn't mind spending quite a bit of time on it, because I'm selling all the time involved in that project at a very high margin, so to speak, right? If I have my internal costs and then I look at margin from that. So I think that is a factor. Definitely projects that are $500, for me personally, I wouldn't even go after. It would have to be something I really want to do, or someone I want to do a favor for me to take a fixed price project of $500, because every project has, beyond of course the bidding for the project and the arranging of the contract, some overhead, right? Like you have to understand the brief, you have to communicate with the client, answer their emails, their Slack messages, whatever it is. You have to chase up your bill sometimes. There's just too much overhead involved for me to spend on smaller projects. But there is a difference between open and curated marketplaces in size for sure, and hourly rates. And a large part of that is competition. On Upwork, sometimes you find high-paying clients too. I have to say, I've once found a high-paying client from the UK on Upwork, but it's very much by exception.
Yeah, and also it feels like you have to have a lot of reviews to stand out. I know I've had people, I mean, I've posted a job there before and there's just hundreds of applicants and it's very overwhelming. But thank you so much for going over this. I think this is a great screenshot overview of what's out there and what to really target. When you say, it's something that you said earlier about being a product manager versus managing projects. This is early on in your talk. You're saying the former brings in more cash versus the other one, people ask about your experience. Can you talk more about that concept?
So no, it's a product manager versus a product leader. And it's a little bit different. So the idea here is that there are product leadership freelance jobs out there. Sometimes I see them come through on a platform that I spent, well, at the moment, 80% of my income is on TopTal. So on TopTal, I sometimes see these come through, but they are few and far in between, right? There are not many of them. They have higher sort of hourly rates for sure, but also they're often part-time or hourly. So again, like the top line of the project isn't necessarily as high. The issue is like product management as a discipline. There are always less product managers than developers, right? So you have often, for example, one product manager on 8 developers, or in Europe, sometimes even on 20. Now, there are, again, less product leaders than product managers. So for an organization to have a product management team with a product leader, it has to actually have quite a substantial size. And there are only so many organizations of that size that happen to be in a position that either they are scaling so fast that their internal product managers couldn't gradually train up to be product leaders, or they want an outsourced sort of product leader to come in and coach their managers, or their product leader is for some reason incapacitated and they have to have an interim fill for that leader, or they can't hire fast enough internally and they need someone to come in. So it's just very uncommon that product leaders are hired on a freelance basis. when they are hired on a freelance basis, most of the time as a freelancer, you're not being hired to grow into a position. You're being hired for skills you already have. And so unless you've already been a product leader, it's unlikely for you to win that job, especially because you're competing against people that have already done it for quite a while and that are now part-time freelancing. That's something I noticed, like there are some part-time freelancers here. One thing I will mention about part-time freelancing is that depending on your discipline, a lot of the jobs you'll find are 20 to 40 hours a week, especially, for example, in engineering, in software development. A lot of freelance jobs are immediate needs, right? So someone wants to build a product now. They want an MVP to launch very soon. And for that to happen, they need resources that just come in and build over a short period of time for a lot of time. And then later on, you might go into a maintenance contract. So if you're only available for, say, 10 hours a week, it's much harder to fill that 10 hours a week than if you're available for 40 hours a week and you want to fill 40. Just something to keep in mind. And so if you're a part-time freelancer, what I often recommend, and this is again something from my personal experience over 6 years, is it helps to be flexible. So it helps if you're already working a full-time job and you're allowed and able to, like, physically, mentally do it, to even accept up to another full-time on top of it. So you're working 80 hours a week for a while because it's easier to fill and you earn a lot of cash. And then you don't work for a while, maybe, or at least don't freelance for a while, or you take 20 hours on top of your 40, versus saying I can only do 10, because filling that 10 is going to be very hard. Like I sometimes work 80 hours a week, 90 hours a week, and then sometimes I work 30 hours a week or less, right? And that fluctuation is very natural in a full-time freelancer cycle, but I would encourage part-time freelancers to do that as well. Yeah.
Very cool. So we have actually lots of questions about Braintrust in the chat, which I'll address in a little bit, but I want to just finish the Q&A with Chris first. Okay, let's see. So Priyanka is asking if you have any tips for someone with project management experience coming from a different industry to break into the freelance world. Priyanka, do you feel comfortable elaborating on that?
Yeah, so basically my question was around what tips do you have for a brand new freelancer, right? When I say brand new, doesn't mean I've graduated yesterday. I do have about 12 years of experience, project management experience in the oil and gas industry, but that's not something that you typically see where people are looking for somebody with oil and gas experience. They're mostly looking for developers or programmers or coders. So my question was, how can I use my project management experience to basically, how do I leverage my skill sets into that world? Because I know I do have some transferable skills, but I've not been able to crack that code.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation would be call yourself an agile project manager. Make sure you're good with agile processes, because in case you in the oil and gas industry use the waterfall model, it's much harder to find waterfall work. Not many organizations follow a waterfall process anymore. Get a few software projects under your belt, or do some volunteering in software related projects. There's a lot of volunteering going on with COVID right now. And if you do a COVID related software type project on a project management basis, you can make really good stories about it. People will love it. Half the trick of getting a job is the storytelling, right? Like you have a profile that gets you an interview. The interview is where the magic happens. You have to have a conversation with the client. And the conversation is not like, this is me, this is my background. Like they can read your background in the pitch. It's rather about, okay, like what is the situation you're in? How can I deliver value for that? And offer some active suggestions during the interview. I think that's always really appreciated, because then it becomes a two-way conversation. So you level the playing field, right? So when you're pitching a client, it's not like the client's up here, you're down here, you're begging them for that work. It actually becomes just a conversation about the work in the middle. You're even giving them some value for free in the interview. Some people are like, oh, I'm not being paid for this. Should I give them my ideas? Just give them the ideas, because if you give them the idea, you don't get the job. You got $0, right? But if you didn't give them the idea and you didn't get the job, you also got $0, right? So you don't lose anything by doing so. And even if they don't give you the job, you have made a better impression, and you might get some benefit from that in the future.
And Priyanka, I would say taking a step back even before you get to do an interview, a lot of times it's highlighting the actual skills that are desired. So even though if you're coming from a different industry, there are most look for skills that are trending right now. So like Chris said, you know, highlighting projects that you did during COVID, because that's what people are talking about. But what's specifically for project management, right? I don't know what those specific ones are, but let's say if it's a design role, it could be, okay, you should be really good with action scripting or animation, or like highlighting the specific skills that's trending and what people are looking for. I think is something that's an immediate match when they look at your profile, I presume is how you would be presenting yourself.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Mm-hmm. And then, okay, I'm looking at chat. So, okay, any tips? Lita, you said any tips to land a client in case there's a client interview with them. Did you have specific questions around interviews or a situation that you want to talk about? Lita, are you here? Okay. So moving along, I think I wanted to ask Magnus, since he's here, to share with us a little bit about his experience, because Magnus, you were also freelancing and then you also joined a company, a crowdfunding platform as a CTO role. So curious to hear, you know, what was that transition and what made you decide to do that?
So I think it's like, what's really important is that you find something that is interesting to you. So Chris said not to think about growing in a role, but a lot of times the reality is that if you don't challenge yourself, no one is going to challenge you. So what I find is it's just about working with good people, work on things that are interesting, and then it's sort of like, okay, we could do something. It was actually with Chris who did this crowdfunding platform. So it's like, okay, it's kind of interesting. It's fun to work on it. And then have something to fall back on so that, okay, if I have a week with not a lot of projects, I can work on my own project. If I have a week with a lot of projects, I can put the own project on the back burner. And I think, especially if you're technical, just being out there and seeing what new technology there is, it does help, because a lot of times you see that there's certain technologies that are being used more than others. Make sure to understand which ones are being used a lot, and make sure to read hacker news, make sure to see, okay, when I was doing just like Node, it was one ball game. Then when I'm doing Node and React, it's different ball game. There's always something happening in the ecosystem. Making sure to see, okay, why did people make TypeScript? Why did people make Swift? You know, just reading sometimes the documentation or the blog post behind it really helps you to understand and always talk to the client, talk to other developers, and then just find someone you enjoy working with and some projects you enjoy working on. I think that's the most important, because as a developer, you kind of book a lot of times for longer term projects. Make sure you enjoy those projects, make sure you learn something from them, because otherwise, you know, it's not really fun.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask the group in terms of just like pipeline, right? In addition to applying for jobs or looking for jobs, there is something called just more passive, or a different way to prospect. And one way is through inbound marketing. Another way is through thought leadership. And I'm just curious to see whether or not this group has actually invested the time, or does it not apply to you because it's a different, you know, you're in a certain profession. So when I say inbound marketing, I'm talking about creating content, right? That's valuable to the people that you want to attract. And so what Chris is doing right now is thought leadership and some inbound marketing, because he's putting himself out there as an expert, so that he's known. And people, when, you know, people see him online, this is going to be recorded, it's going to be shared. When people Google, he's going to pop up, right? So are there things that you do and that you've done successfully that you can share with a group when it comes to inbound marketing? Some things could be, hey, creating a good social media channel and updating that, or creating blog content, right? Even hosting virtual events with experts in the industry to get potential clients' attention. Does that apply to you? Have you done any of that? anyone can share. It's a safe environment.
Well, I can tell about my experience. I was told that we're all tags, so that we should care our virtual life as well as our real life. And we should start dedicating at least 1 hour a day to social networks, to writing blogs, articles. So I did it for a while, probably 6 months. And the result was not worth it in my case. So I stopped doing that. I now do participate, if I'm required, I do participate maybe in webinars or in-person conferences. And that also doesn't bring me any bread on the table, but at least I enjoy it, just to see people in face-to-face. And regarding my personal experience, I get most of the clients through LinkedIn. I had a lot of them to LinkedIn because they just knocked my door. And through the various platforms, I've been on Upwork. I'm not proud of that, and also on Job Talent and some others. So yeah, in my opinion, by the way, I'm a database developer. So I market myself as a SQL expert. And in my case, I don't feel that having a busy digital life would make any difference. But that's my 2 cents.
Thank you for sharing, Davide. I'm thinking, potentially it depends on the profession. That's why I asked the question, because in my background, I'm more familiar with the marketing and creative side of freelancing. And I know with any creative freelancer, Instagram is the #1 platform. It's just so different. Instagram is something that you have to showcase your work, because that's where creatives are looking for inspiration and connecting with one another. Whereas I know developers, a lot of times, you don't need a website. Your site is GitHub, and that's where you showcase your work. So it's very different when it comes to how you attract people. And because they come to you from anywhere. It's not just your website, but it's where people already are. So in the comments or in the chat, some people say that they answer Quora questions, so that it's, you're searchable when clients are searching for a potential solution, your name pop up, and potentially you have a really well thought out answer. They want to find out more from you and hire you for a project. And someone posted, Randy posted, Randy, uses LinkedIn to reply to blog posts and content as just thought leadership, and essentially, put yourself out there as, again, the expert to a specific subject. So I think that's really interesting to see how different professions are utilizing inbound marketing with success and some without, obviously. And so I think, is there any more specific questions around building pipeline or things that you want to share before I transition to the more Braintrust questions and answers?
Actually, Shirley, I'd love to go off of what you just said about Instagram, because I'm a professional writer, and with COVID, I got laid off of my full-time job. So now I'm focusing on content writing and copywriting, and Instagram has been huge for me. So I do not consider myself to be like an influencer of any kind, not that big on trying to promote myself as a brand ambassador. But what I started doing was reaching out to stories I find, companies who are doing something innovative. And in doing that, now I'm finding that people are wanting their stories told in some way. Now I feel like for this group is good because people decide to tell their stories in different ways. Some of them see their stories being told through great web content, through a great web design, project management of that sort. So I feel like for me personally, when I reach out to companies that I know need a bigger following, they see an investment in people who are willing to help. So I don't pitch them in the way where I'm saying, hey, do you need this? I've pitched them with the kind of concept of, what you're doing is amazing, and I see you being able to grow. How can I help you? This is what I can offer. And through that, I think Instagram has been just such an amazing tool for that. And I recommend it for any profession.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, Nicole. And, you know, this actually reminds me, I'd love to see if there's a way that we can help one another. I mean, we have 41 people right now in this group. If there's a way that we can either do cross promotions or any kind of, I don't know, sharing of some sort, where it's non-competitive, but maybe adding value to clients, I'd love to see how that could be set up. Any ideas on how we can do that? Should I provide, I mean, I'm just brainstorming right now. Should we provide sort of your name and then your profession and maybe just a blurb of what you do? And then you can go through the list and say, okay, this is, let's say, Nicole, you're a writer. Oftentimes maybe the clients are looking for a designer, then you can recommend someone on the list. Or, I mean, are there other ideas? Would you guys want to do this through Slack, or what do you think? I've never done this before, so. Chris, help me out.
I was actually in the middle of writing something about the marketing piece in the chat, but I'll just talk about it instead now. So I'll bring us back to the last topic. So for developers specifically, something I often recommend to developers that I work with on projects for clients where we go through specific technical challenges, right? So recently, for example, there was an e-learning WordPress site that I was helping a client develop with a single WordPress developer working on it. And we were basing it on a WordPress plugin called LearnDash. Now, LearnDash had bad documentation. So a lot of time was spent figuring out how does their API work. Some of it was not documented. So I told him, I was like, you should write a blog post walking through this very specific challenge. If people then Google, like, okay, how do I do this with LearnDash? You might surface. But of course, like, he doesn't surface on his own blog necessarily, unless he puts a lot of effort into his own blog, setting that up, publishing content to it continuously, etc. So you could put it on Stack Overflow. You might find people there. You could do in Quora. He got this job via a platform. In this case, it was TopDown. TopDown spends a lot of money doing SEO and search marketing for its blog, right? So I told him, if you publish it on a TopDown blog, of course they're not going to pay you for it. You are giving them some free stuff, but you'll be the person on that article. So if they want someone to do that very specific thing, they'll ask for you. Braintrust can probably do the same, if Braintrust, of course, spends on Google marketing, because you want to piggyback on top of a platform that already has that inbound search result. Now, you do have to note that the people you're marketing to then are very specific, right? Like, they want that very specific thing solved, and they think you can do that specific thing. So it has to be something you want to keep doing. And the people you're marketing to are probably not non-technical. So they're probably other developers. So they might only bring you in for a very short stint to fix that specific thing. It does change the way you're marketing yourself. So it's something to keep in mind on that front. I personally don't really do all these blog posts because I don't really have one specific thing I am the solution for. You know, I'm not your product manager that fixes a very specific thing for you in your product. No, I'll just help you make a product in general. But and a lot of designers might be the same, right? Like, you could be a designer for a very specific, I'll create your custom iconography or your logo type, or you can just be a great designer with a portfolio site. You'll attract different kinds of clients and different kinds of jobs, something to keep in mind. Yeah.
So I was talking to a branding coach the other day, and he helps freelancers and entrepreneurs sort of build their reputation and their clout, if you will, online. And he said one tactic that anyone can do, if you have time for it, is actually host sort of a series of interviews of experts in the space, like experts that other people look up to. And so you can say, hey, this is your series. So it could be like a master series of a specific topic within your arena, right? So then it'll appear, even though you're interviewing the person, but it'll seem like you are the actual subject matter expert because you're providing this content. And the good thing about this is most likely the people you interview will be willing to share that out as well. So you can create some kind of a social surrounding around the content that you create. And, you know, you can put it on YouTube, you can put it on Medium, it lives forever. So that's one tactic. Unless you're fully invested into it, I would personally not recommend it, because if you put a video on YouTube, right, like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, did it really fall?
there are a lot of videos on YouTube with very, very few views, right? So these series, most of the time you build clout over time. So having a library of content already in there, when people go to your video, they see, oh, he's already done a lot of these. It does give you more legitimacy, right? But unless you keep doing this for a long period of time, you're unlikely, unless you have a big hit, to have much result from it. It's something I more recommend for students, for example, like do interviews with people that may be inclined to give you an internship afterwards. But it's just about dedication. It takes a lot of time.
I mean, definitely. YouTube was just an example, but if people have Instagram, you can do Instagram stories. If people have LinkedIn, you can do LinkedIn articles. So then it's not so obvious that you only have very little views to start with.
Instagram stories are only viewed by the people who follow you, right? So you're basically shouting in your own bubble. I'm a bit of a skeptic and a realist on some of these topics. Unless you're dedicated to it, if you're dedicated to it, it can be fantastic, amazing, right? Like I know I have friends who made millions on Snapchat being an influencer at some point because they started and they kept doing it. But if you're going to do 5 interviews with product leaders and post them and you've done 5, then you'll be the guy or the girl or the person who's done 5 interviews with product leaders. That doesn't suddenly make you more of an expert. You've just done 5. People think like, oh, you had a little project, you did a couple of interviews, that's cool. If you've done 30, right, like every week for a year, maybe you've done 50 plus, you produced one at a regular pace, that's something really cool. And that is the passion economy, actually. So you can monetize that in and of itself. You can have a Substack with a newsletter that you charge people for. But if you have a Substack that publishes at infrequent frequencies, right, infrequently, you do it once in a while, people don't really know what to expect. You're not going to get a good subscriber count either, unless your content is so tremendously high value.
Yeah, definitely. It takes dedication to build something like that. Well, I think this is great. I'm going to send out this recording back to everyone, but right now I'm going to reserve the last couple minutes just to answer some Braintrust questions that are in the chat group. So essentially, how the token works is that it represents control over the platform. If you think about what control is, it's basically you can vote on what we build going forward. I believe, Chris, you were part of writing the specs for that for us, actually. And also governance, right? So right now we take a 10% flat fee. That's probably not likely going to change, but having control and voting right, each one Btrust equals 1 vote, right? So that's representing ownership over a platform. That's one category. The other category is you'll have token rewards. So for example, I'm working on things like discount software, free things that you can access, like for Sketch, Adobe products, tech software, and also free products, right? So it's kind of like token rewards, just like credit card rewards, but instead it's accumulating tokens and you can redeem these things as a thank you. And so other things that we're also building into the platform includes unlocking special features on the platform. We're building something called Braintrust Academy. So I saw that there were a lot of people here that are sort of newer to freelancing. I think our first course, Ready, Set, Go, I actually quietly launched to a small group. So far the reception is fantastic. So I'll send that link to this group as well. So you can go and take a look at that course, but it's completely free. And you earn tokens as you complete each lesson. And you can unlock masterclasses on things like really how to pitch clients, how to develop really good business development relationships, sales partnerships, things like that with the tokens that you earn. So that's the piece of unlocking features and unlocking classes and materials from Braintrust by earning tokens. I see Pete nodding his head. That's very encouraging. And so there's a lot of other things that we're thinking of building into the token, but essentially the goal is to get everyone to earn tokens and use tokens because that's what gives the token value. Currently, our token has not been launched yet, but once we have a public launch, that's really the upside of the Braintrust platform. And so how do we earn tokens? I'm going to send out a token guide after this as well. But essentially, it's helping us build a network. You know, like today, Chris hosted a session with us. We didn't talk about this, but we're going to give him some B-Trust as a thank you. A lot of times we're looking for people to talk about us on Twitter because you know, we just came out of stealth and our investors, journalists, and potential clients are sitting on LinkedIn and Twitter. They want to hear about Braintrust. They want real people to talk about Braintrust. And so we would ask you to say, hey, can you share this link, or can you share a research paper? If you go to Twitter under hashtag Talent Revolution, you'll see thousands of posts from Braintrust Talents talking about, you know, about us, because we want people to know, hey, we're out of stealth. Come hire the awesome talents that we have. So that's another way to earn B-Trust. If you're not already in our Slack, please let me know and I'll add you to the Slack. But there is specifically a Earn B-Trust channel and then a Use B-Trust channel where we'll drop in opportunities to earn token. Does that answer the token question pretty much? In terms of bidding on the platform, so I don't really love the term bid. I think it's more submitting a proposal. So essentially how Braintrust works is we're very white glove service. And this goes back to the point of a curated marketplace. We avoid the feeling of bidding to the bottom, and we don't want people to lower your rates. So exactly aligned to what Chris was talking about. Essentially, we want to make sure that anyone who submits a bid for a project is aligned with what the client is looking for. And our clients are predominantly enterprise Fortune 1000 companies. And these are large accounts where we want long-term relationships with. It's not like something on Upwork a lot of times you see is, hey, here's $200, I need a logo, and that's it. These are companies like Nestle, you know, they're looking for people to build their entire financial system. Or NASA is a recent new client of ours that took 11 months to procure, super proud about, but they're launching, you know, lunar mission projects, right? And so there's a lot of components in there, and we want to have a really good relationship with both the clients and with you. So this way, we do white glove matching in a sense that we prove every single profile that comes in. And if you're not approved yet, don't worry. It's only because we don't know you're there. You have to raise your hand to me or Megan Conard. You guys probably already heard her name before. She sends out newsletters about job positions. If there's anything that looks like you're a good fit, but you're not approved yet, or you haven't been invited to bid, send her an email and say, hey, I'm interested. And then that's when she will actually put you in and match with a client for an interview screen. So everything is very white glove. That's where we're really different from the commodity marketplaces, because we want to provide a good experience on both sides. In terms of the category breakdowns of roles, we're predominantly tech roles right now. However, you know, I was a founder of Muses app. It's a freelancer, creative freelancer and entrepreneur network of designers, marketing, writing, a lot of very like creative type people. And I was acquired by Braintrust earlier this year, specifically for potential category expansion. We're not there yet, but we're starting with tech because it's the highest, I want to say, ticket value projects right now. But we are getting ready to give more opportunities to people in different verticals. And that's why I'm here. There are projects sometimes, like we're talking to a really large bank in the United States, and they are looking for, hey, tangential roles in addition to technical. They're asking, hey, do you know any growth marketers? Because it'll really help accelerate our project. And we're going to need really good copy editing for that project. So there are definitely tangential roles that will be coming up in addition to tech and product. I hope that answers questions as well. Any other questions for us? We're out of time. We used up the whole 1 hour. Last remarks? Well, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this. Please feel free to email me your feedback. And I'm going to send this recording back to everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.